Meghali ma'am, so we can start the
Yes, sir.
seminar.
Yes, sir. Sure. A very good morning to one and all present here. Today we have gathered here for a seminar on the works of the bird of Avon, commonly known as William Shakespeare. We are very fortunate to have with us one of the leading experts in this field, Professor Amitabh Roy. I heartily welcome you, sir. I welcome all the teachers and the students who have joined us for this seminar. Professor Roy is a seventh generation descendant of Maharaja Nanda Kumar. He is an alumni of the South Point High School, St. Xavier's College, and Jadavpur University in Kolkata. And he continued his studies at various universities in USA, UK, and Germany. He has been a visiting professor at Oxford University in UK, the universities of Columbia, Ohio, Atlanta, Yale, universities of Munich, Berlin, and Heidelberg, among others in India and abroad. Sir began his teaching career at Rabindra Bharati University in the year 1968 and retired in 2012 as the Shakespeare Professor of English and Drama. He is the co-founder and president of the Shakespeare Society of Eastern India and director, Shakespeare Center for Advanced Research. He is the author and co-author of 15 books and over 350 journalistic articles and academic papers on literary masters like Shakespeare, Tagore, Beckett, John Osborne, Girish Karnat, and Mahesh Dattani. He co-edits together with Anthony Joha, Ronan Peterson, Sheila Kava, Brian Reynolds, among his other joint ventures. Sir is also an internationally famous actor and director. He has over 50 productions of Shakespeare and over 30 productions of playwrights all over the world. Sir, we are honored and privileged to have you among us this morning. I would now request you, sir, to carry on with today's proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Meghali, for that very kind and wonderful introduction.
Thank you, sir.
I'm very happy to be here. You have the respected principal of your institution, J.D. Biswas, and you and the teachers, the staff of this esteemed institution, and my students. You have invited me to present a talk on Shakespeare for the next hour or so. I usually prefer to talk to my students directly, but since this is lockdown time and I have to use this technology, which is fine, but which cuts out immediate interaction. I usually ask some simple questions to my listeners, the students, and they, whatever they answer, we take it on from there. I would like to do that if I'm asked again to speak to you in non-COVID times when I can directly interact with you. But today we have to use this technology, and questions from you, which I very much want to hear, will have to wait for the end of the program, when you will have to type them out and then they will be passed on to Meghali or another teacher, and then they will be asked to me. So it's a long drawn out process, but we'll just have to abide by that. So let me begin by saying that this is my favorite area of discussion or talk, Shakespeare. And I usually begin my presentations by asking my students to name two of the world's greatest creative writers. And usually, what the answer is, I would have asked you this directly, but I can't. So I am guessing that you answer this way. And usually, the answer that one is, of course, our very own Rabindranath Tagore, and the other is William Shakespeare, the subject of today's presentation. Now, both have many things in common, Shakespeare and Rabindranath. They are both gurus, both are literary masters, both have tremendous gain, that is, realization, enlightenment about humanity, about society, about everything that there is upon this earth. They have gain, realization, and they also couple that gain with enjoyment, anundo, which both of them offer to their listeners, hearers, and readers. Though, of course, I must tell you that this is a major problem that we have faced as teachers, and I've been teaching, as you've been told, for over 50 years, and whatever there is in the syllabus becomes very boring for our students, and they find great difficulty in finding any kind of enjoyment or relish in pursuing what is there in the syllabus and preparing for the horrid exams. Now, this is a major problem that I have faced, and I'm sure your wonderful teachers who are doing whatever they can to enlighten you, Meghali and her colleagues, they have also felt this, and that is something that we have to really get around as much as we can. But it is true that whatever there is in the syllabus becomes very boring and a burden for our students, though we do our best to make it light and bearable. Now, what is common to Shakespeare and Rabindranath is how I begin talking about them to my students. There are many things in common. I've just mentioned some. Their knowledge and their ability to provide anundo, entertainment. That is there. But apart from that, what is remarkable about them is that unlike you and me, they never went beyond school, leave alone studying in the college or in the university. Rabindranath, of course, gave up school after a couple of attempts, and then later in life went on to establish his own school and college and university in Shantiniketan. But that was much later. So Rabindranath gave up school right in the beginning. And Shakespeare managed to go through a bit of schooling, what we would nowadays call madhyamik, let us say. In his time, it was grammar school. It was called grammar school, where grammar was taught, but apart from that, other things too. And as you can understand from the name, grammar is not a very enjoyable subject generally, though some of you must be very good at grammar. But I personally have never been very good at grammar, and I find the grammatical rules very difficult to remember about gerunds and participles and clauses and subordinate clauses and kinds of sentences, all those things. So Shakespeare managed to go through a bit of grammar school and then left for Ruti Ruji to earn his bread and butter, and also for other reasons, to go to London to make his fortune, if possible. Now, these two playwrights and writers, creative writers, have a huge body of work Shakespeare, as you may know, wrote around 37 plays, some long poems, sonnets, some short poems, and Rabindranath tried his hand successfully at most of the creative forms which were available to him, meaning novel, short story, dance drama, drama, symbolic drama, various kinds of plays. Uh, he wrote, he composed and set to tune usually around 2,500 songs. So he did most everything that can be done in creative fields, and both of them have left this legacy for us. Rabindranath, of course, won the Nobel Prize, which in the interim got stolen. Uh, he won that Nobel Prize, and Shakespeare, when he wrote, there were not Nobel Prizes available about 500 years ago, but he won the prize of our appreciation, our, and he became, like Rabindranath, immortal. Now, what are these kinds of plays? Let me concentrate on the plays because your subject is Merchant of Venice, which your wonderful teachers have been teaching you line by line, scene by scene, act by act, and you have both class 9 and 10 journeyed quite far into the text of Merchant of Venice. So our subject is that play and Shakespeare. So I'll come to the play and to Shakespeare's plays now and begin with asking you to emulate, to follow what Shakespeare and Rabindranath did. What they did was they studied whatever they could in the institutions that they occasionally went to, but they learned from whatever sources of learning and knowledge were available to them, from life itself and from various other sources. Now, you are very lucky to have some things which they did not have. You have the TV, you have newspapers. They had newspapers, Rabindranath and Shakespeare, but not a tremendous amount of newspapers like you have, various kinds, so in various languages. So you have newspapers from which you can learn a lot, get a lot of information. You watch the TV, the regional, national news discussion, from which you can learn a lot. And you also can watch BBC television. And you can also learn a lot in an enjoyable fashion from films. I'm sure most of you have seen or heard of a Hindi film called Sholay, starring Dharmendra and Amitabh Bachchan, Mr. Lumbu. And that film, if you haven't seen it, then please go and see it because it's regularly available on TV, and there's also cassettes or whatever they are nowadays used to present films. So Sholay is something which is a very powerful film, but it is also what is called a revenge tragedy. A revenge tragedy is a play which ends with most people dying and in violence, and usually also the hero dies along with the others. Shakespeare wrote revenge tragedies. The Greeks wrote revenge tragedies. The Greeks, from which European drama, Western drama began, wrote mostly revenge tragedies. And Shakespeare's best known play is a revenge tragedy. I'm sure you will know the play if I mention to you that the main character, whose name is the title of the play, says these words, to be or not to be. That is the question. Zindagi or maut, yahi hai sangla. Now, this is Hamlet, of course, and Hamlet is a revenge tragedy. So, Sholay is a revenge tragedy, and Hamlet too is a revenge tragedy. And if you see Sholay, it would be an entertaining and enjoyable way of getting introduced to the form of revenge tragedy. Now, Shakespeare wrote other kinds of tragedies too, and one of them deals with two young people like you who are in love and wish to marry, but their parents and their communities and society in general is against this union, this marriage. And they end up, since this is a tragedy, they end up both dying in each other's arms at the end of the play. Now, this play has been translated and filmed in most of the world's languages, and there are many Hindi versions of this play too. One is called QSQT, which is, in case you don't know, Kiamat se Kiamat tak. Another is Ek Duje Ke Liye, and many others. There is a happy ending version of this Shakespearean play called Bobby, where the lovers ultimately do get united. And by this time, I'm sure you know that the play I'm talking about, play of young love, which ends tragically, is called Romeo and Juliet. And this is the kind of play which young people very much like, and also older people, because Shakespeare wrote not only for the young, but for all kinds of audiences, for all age groups. And he remains alive in the hearts of all these different kinds of audiences all over the world. Now, a revenge tragedy is a play which there's a simple formula for revenge tragedies. Tragedies end, or any kind of tragedy, tragedies end in multiple deaths, and comedies end in multiple marriages. Tragedies end in multiple deaths, comedies end in multiple marriages. This is a simple formula to remember for you. This is a simple formula for you to remember when you have to answer questions on Merchant of Venice or any of the other plays that you have to study. Tragedies end in multiple deaths, comedies end in multiple marriages. And if you know a bit of your Merchant of Venice, you will know that Merchant of Venice ends with many marriages. Lorenzo and Jessica, Nerissa and Graciano, Bassanio and Portia, to name three couples. So that is what, that is how comedies end. One way of knowing that it's a comedy. A comedy is simply a play which makes us laugh and which tries to make us happy. And therefore, they end in happy reunions. Merchant of Venice, of course, like a lot of Shakespeare's plays, though officially it's called a comedy, has many dimensions, many aspects, which are not really comic. For instance, if you remember, and the first dialogue in Merchant of Venice begins like this with Antonio saying, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad." So, comedy begins with a person exclaiming that he's sad. It's a very odd way of beginning a comedy. And apart from Antonio saying, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad," there are a lot of other sad and melancholy and, well, nearly tragic elements in Merchant of Venice, as there are in other comedies of Shakespeare. Actually, what Shakespeare wrote were not comedies only or tragedies. As the 18th century critic and dictionary maker, lexicographer, Dr. Samuel Johnson, very famous name in Shakespeare criticism, Dr. Samuel Johnson wrote in one of his essays on Shakespeare that Shakespeare does not write only tragedy or only comedy. He writes a mingled kind of drama. Shakespeare wrote neither tragedy nor comedy, but a mingled kind of drama. That is a drama. If a comedy, it contains a lot of sad things, and if it's a tragedy, it contains a lot of laughter and funny things. So it mingles or intermingles, blends, brings together opposite poles. A comedy ends in multiple marriages, but before that, there are a lot of tragic dimensions and melancholy dimensions in it, which get somehow resolved at the end of the play. And a tragedy ends in multiple deaths, but it does also contain mirth and laughter and various kinds of farce or happiness. Now, this is something that we must remember when we look at The Merchant of Venice or any other Shakespeare play. To go back to the point with which I started, that Shakespeare and Rabindranath had very little formal education. We are lucky in one way that we do have some formal education. What we do with it is, of course, well, remains to be seen. We are very lucky to have teachers who are teaching us a lot of discipline, a lot of formal education in class. But Shakespeare and Rabindranath did not have that. And therefore, Shakespeare had to undergo a lot of insults in his time. Shakespeare used to go to a tavern with his colleagues and rivals, other playwrights and friends in London. A tavern is a kind of coffee house or a public canteen where you go and have drinks and snacks. And Shakespeare and his contemporaries, the people who lived around his time, they would go to a tavern called the Mermaid Tavern. Nice name, Mermaid Tavern. And it has been recorded in various journals by others of these addas, these get-togethers that Shakespeare had with his contemporary friends and rivals in the Mermaid Tavern, where one of his major contemporaries, whose name you may not have heard of, Ben Jonson, or you may have heard of his name, Ben Jonson laughingly joked and, laughingly insulted Shakespeare by saying that you have small Latin and less Greek. That is, you have very little knowledge of classical languages. Small Latin and less Greek. Shakespeare's plays do have a lot of Latin and Greek, which he picked up not from his university education or college education, which he didn't have, but from various books and from various institutions which he saw in operation, like the church, marriage, various things, and learned from others. But he had to undergo this insult that he had very little Latin and even less knowledge of Greek. Uh, one of Shakespeare's contemporaries was a person called Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe. He too wrote a play about a rich Jew. That play, Merchant of Venice, is about a rich Jew, Shylock, about other things too, but it has a rich Jew, Shylock, as a major role. Marlowe wrote a play about a rich Jew called The Tragedy of Barabbas. A rich Jew. The rich Jew Barabbas, his tragedy. Now, these other writers who congregated around Shakespeare, who were Shakespeare's friends and rivals and colleagues, competitors, they were generally university wits. Shakespeare was, of course, not a university wit. You and me can go and become university wits, which simply means that you study in a university, and wit means a creative person. So Shakespeare was not a university wit. Marlowe was, Ben Jonson was, and others were. Shakespeare, like Rabindranath, was not a university wit. Now, you can learn about all this in a pleasurable way if you see a film called Shakespeare in Love. This film, your teachers may have shown this to you. If they have not, I will request Meghali and her wonderful colleagues to take a little time out and make you see this film, which is an interpretation, a fictional interpretation of Shakespeare's life and times, but a lot of it is good factual information and presented in a very interesting way. Shakespeare in Love. If you haven't seen it, I would like you to see it. It's about 2 hours long and it's very interesting, where Marlowe is a character. As I said, it's fictional, but based on a lot of important and documented facts. Now, to come to The Merchant of Venice, to return to The Merchant of Venice, The Merchant of Venice has 3 main plot strands. It is built on 3 major plot patterns. One is what is called the bond story. The bond between the contract, the bond for a pound of flesh entered into this contract by Shylock and by Antonio. So that is a major part of the play, the bond story, and this is not a very funny part of the play. It's quite a near tragic or quite tragic and serious and melancholy dimension of the play. The other is the casket story, the casket sequence, where suitors, lovers of the rich heiress, wealthy lady Portia, have to come and choose a casket, the right casket, inside which is the poem, which says that you have chosen right and you can marry Portia. This casket business is, of course, part of Portia's father's will. Portia's father had this will made that whoever wishes to marry my daughter will have to win the competition through this casket. Break the riddle of the casket. Gold, silver, and lead, three kinds of casket. So pick the one which I have decided is the right one, and you can then marry my daughter. And the third is the ring story. The rings which Portia and Nerissa, dressed as lawyers, give to Bassanio, have given to Bassanio and Nerissa's husband, Salarno. These rings are demanded by Portia and Nerissa dressed as lawyers as a kind of reward for what they've done. They've saved Antonio's life and done what they had to do. And these rings are given to them. And that creates some funny and not so funny complications at the end of the play. Now, these are the three main strands of the play: the casket story, the bond story, the ring story. One thing you have to see here is that what Portia has to undergo is to abide by her father's will. Her father decides through the caskets who she is going to marry. And this is more or less very Indian. Most Indian parents and fathers decide who their daughters or sons might marry. So there's a lot of things which are very Indian in Shakespeare. This is one such. Though things are changing, and nowadays, for good or for ill, parental wishes are not always abided by, not always accepted by the children. In Shakespeare too, there are sons and daughters who don't go by parental wishes, as we have already seen in Romeo and Juliet. But basically, in that patriarchal society, male-dominated society, it's the will of the fathers that decided the marriage of their children, which is also a part of the Indian way of life. One of the interesting things, another Indian dimension in The Merchant of Venice, whose plot I've been talking about so far, one of the other interesting things about The Merchant of Venice is how the Christians get out of the problem of the bond demanded by Shylock. The bond says that if the payment is not made in time, then Shylock can cut a pound of flesh from nearest the heart of Antonio, who has borrowed the money to finance Bassanio's marriage, and it will be given by the state. So this is a very strange bond, but it is a bond which both agree to, that if I cannot repay the money in time, then you can cut Antonio agrees to this contract, tells Shylock, you can cut a pound of flesh from my breast nearest to the heart. And you have not come up to this part of the play in class, but you're close to it. This is the trial scene, which I shall anticipate a bit for you. And in that trial scene, the court agrees to pay, to allow the Jew, Shylock, to take his pound of flesh, because that is the contract. But when he's about to cut with a knife the pound of flesh from Antonio's heart, nearest his heart, Portia, dressed as a male lawyer, says, tarry a little. Stop. Just a moment. One moment, please. You want a pound of flesh, and you're carrying a balance with which you have to weigh that pound of flesh. It is in the contract that you will get a pound of flesh. And we will agree to, the Court of Venice agrees to give you that pound of flesh because it's a legal contract and you're bound to get it. But make sure that when you cut that pound of flesh from Antonio's heart, you do not shed a drop of Christian blood. You'll get your pound of flesh, but you cannot shed a drop of Christian blood, because that is not in the bond. The bond just says a pound of flesh. And with that, Shylock is defeated. Shylock's defeat, I shall speak further on it a little later. Shylock is further defeated, but he is immediately defeated because he cannot cut that pound of flesh without shedding a drop of blood. It's impossible. If you cut off a pound of flesh or some bit of flesh from a person's body, blood will be shed, and that is not in the bond. So, this is something, again, very Indian, because we have Indian story. You have heard of Gopal Bhatt. Gopal the Bhatt is Gopal the witty clown, and you may have seen films about Gopal Bhatt. Gopal Bhatt has many funny stories of how he defeated his king in many wit combats. And his king, who kept on trying to defeat Gopal through wit combats, were always getting defeated by Gopal. So once his king decided that this time I will get Gopal, and Gopal was in his hut when the king sent his courtiers, and the courtiers came and told Gopal that the king has ordered that we must defecate on your porch, the tower in front of the hut. This is the king's order, and you must abide by it. You can't get away from it. So Gopal said, if this is the king's order that you will defecate, shed your refuse on my porch, you will have to do it. I cannot go against the king's order. So when they sat down on the porch to defecate on Gopal's cottage, Gopal says what Portia tells Shylock, tarry a little. One moment. Let me read the order. The order, he reads out the order. By king's order and proclamation, all these courtiers are going to use a, well, slang word, shit on your porch. So Gopal said, go ahead and do it, but tarry a little. Because it says nothing about urinating. And if one drop of urine falls when you shit on my porch, I'll cut off your heads. Because we can't go against the king's order. And so once again, Gopal defeats the king as Portia defeats Shylock. Very Indian folklore. There are many other stories about Gopal, equally funny, equally interesting, that you may have heard of or you can read. Now, to come to the major part of my talk about the Merchant of Venice, which is about the two marriages, which is about marriage and about Shylock. I must tell you that to sum up what goes on in that marriage part of the play is that the men make a mess of things. Antonio and Bassanio make a mess. They cannot get out of this mess. And how do they get out of this mess of Shylock's contract? Through their wives. Not Antonio's wife, through Bassanio's wife, Portia, and Salanio's wife, Gratiano's wife, Nerissa, who come dressed as lawyers to defeat Shylock's scheme and plan. Now, they come dressed as men and they take part in what was a male-dominated profession, because at that time it was not considered something that women could do. Public speaking and rational thought, which we know women are very good at, but at that time in a patriarchal society, the idea was that professions like lawyer, etc., scientist, lawyer, which depends on the use of reason, public speaking, discipline, only men could do this. So Portia and Nerissa dress up as men, lawyers, to come and help their husbands and friends out of the mess. To show that women are not only can be equal to men, but as in this case in Merchant of Venice, they're better than men. They are the better halves. They have more sense, they have more intelligence, and they can resolve the problems that men entangle themselves into. That is why one of England's famous novelists, I don't think you've heard of him, it's called Thackeray. Thackeray had observed, reading Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare has no heroes, only heroines. Which means that Shakespeare's heroes are okay, but what grabs our interest, what attracts us most, are the heroines. The heroines, especially in the comedies, are far more intelligent, they take far more initiative, they are far more dynamic than more or less handsome but stupid men. The men don't want to be stupid, but they seem to be so. Bernard Shaw, another great Irish British writer, who you may have heard of him or read something by him. Bernard Shaw therefore says that in Shakespeare, it's the women who always take the initiative. And not only in the comedies. If you read a play called Macbeth, in the first half of the play, Macbeth wants to kill Duncan, a king who comes as a guest to his house to become king himself. Macbeth wants to do this, but is afraid. And it is his wife, Lady Macbeth, who holds Macbeth by his hands and gets him to do what he wanted to do, to fulfill his ambition and to kill the king. Not a very good thing to do, but it's a woman who takes the initiative in the first half of the play and manages to get her husband to do what they wanted to do. So you see, it's the women who ultimately are stronger, more intelligent, more dynamic, they take more witty, and they take the initiative much more than the men can. And so, one of the main things about Shakespearean comedy is that it's woman-centered, that women are seen to be not only the equal, but better than the men, whom they ultimately marry or who they love. So that's a major part of the Merchant of Venice. And you as girls will be, of course, happy to have Shakespeare behind you and celebrate womanhood in the way that he does in these plays. Now let's come to the last part of my talk. And how much time do we have now? How much time has?
It's 11.
Oh, it's
10 to 12.
I think we started at around 11. So we have another 10 minutes or so. So in these 10 minutes, I wish to talk a little about Shylock. Shylock is a Jew, and rich Jews have lived in England, especially London, from the Middle Ages. The Jews are a community, a race, a tribe, who have a religion called Judaism, and who have, in their long history, had to leave their homeland and get scattered all over the world. Therefore, they're called the people of the diaspora. The diaspora means scattering of the seeds. And because of repression, because of attacks upon the Jews, for reasons we shall come to a little later, they have had to scatter all over the world. And a lot of them came to India in the 18th century and a little earlier to settle down. A lot of them went to other European cities and a lot of them went to London. In Shakespeare's London, there were some influential Jews in that city. We in India call them Yehudis. And you may have heard of a great musician called Yehudi Menuhin, who was the conductor of the United Nations Philharmonic Orchestra. He was an Indian Jew, Yehudi Menuhin. And this is one of the things that the Jews are very good at, positive dimension of their character. They're very good. They can be very good musicians. They can make a lot of money through trade, commerce. That is, they're experts at international finance. They're very good at making money. And in India, especially in Kolkata, if you want to buy electrical goods, electronic equipment, then you have to go to a place beside the police headquarters in Lal Bazar. It's a place where all these electronic goods are sold. And it's called, till today, Ezra Street. Ezra being a very famous Jew who contributed greatly to Calcutta's and Bengal's and India's development. And that to commemorate his name, till today, that street, that area is called Ezra Street. If you if you have heard of Browning, and if you have read, or if you haven't, you can go through this poem. Browning wrote a poem called Rabbi Ben Ezra. Rabbi is a Jewish priest. So Ben Ezra. Ezra is a Jewish name. So Ezra Street celebrates the contribution of a great Jewish individual to Kolkata's and India's and Bengal's development. So these Jews, on the positive side, were very good at finance, making money. They're very good musicians, and they were very creative in many ways. On the negative side, they were thought to be conspiratorial, that is, ষড়যন্ত্র, always full of intrigues. They were thought to be somewhat monstrous because there are many folk stories about Jews killing their children who have converted to Christianity. The Jews are people of the Old Testament, and Jesus is the New Testament. So these conspiracy, poisoning, intrigue, and villainy are some of the negative characteristics of the Jews. And I'll give you an important instance of this in Elizabeth's time, Queen Elizabeth's time, when Shakespeare wrote. The Queen had a private doctor, physician, called Rodrigo Lopez, who looked after the Queen and who was charged with conspiring to kill the Queen by administering poison. Now, we don't know whether this charge was true or not, but we do know that he was executed because it was charged and proved to their satisfaction. Maybe his rivals in the court of the Queen did this. We don't know, but certainly this is a case which will give you an idea of the dislike of Jews in England or elsewhere. He was executed. Now, Shylock has many of the great lines in the play. Shylock tells in one of his great speeches to Antonio. By the way, who is the merchant of Venice is a question that you should think of, because there are two merchants. One is Antonio, the Christian, and the other is Shylock, the Jew. And one major difference between them is, one similarity is that both hate each other. And one major difference is that Shylock follows the financial tradition of his tribe and race. That is, he lends money and takes interest. It's called usury, USURY. And Antonio does not take interest. He lends money, gets back the principal, but does not make. In Bengali, it's called Mohajoni Karbar. He's not a Mohajon who lends money and then takes tremendous amount of interest. Now, so that is a major difference between them. The similarity is that they both hate each other. And the hatred goes deep and goes a long way. So in the play, Shylock has this bond with Antonio, as you've been told, as you know, and he's defeated by the time the bond is meant to be worked out. And it is not only the defeat of Shylock, he does not get his pound of flesh, but it's also very important to note that Shylock is stripped of his money, of his religion. He has to convert to Christianity. Everything is taken away from him. He has also lost his daughter, who ran away with Christian Lorenzo, and he has to finance Lorenzo and Jessica's marriage, and whatever little money is left to him, he has to make a will for them. So at the end of the play, he is left with nothing. No daughter, no money, no religion, nothing. And he says, "Nay, you take them all. Take my life. Because if you take my religion, if you take my money, if you take my home, if you take everything that I possess, you take away all the props on which I depend. So you take my life. I do not want to live." But the court spares his life, telling him that you have to become a Christian and have to save yourself. And before that, Portia gives a very major speech, which you will read later on. Your teachers will explain and read that speech to you. The quality of mercy is not strained. She says that it droppeth as the gentle rains from heaven, and it is twice blessed. It blesses the receiver and it blesses the giver, which is not exactly what the court of Venice does. The court of Venice, which is a Christian court, makes this wonderful speech. Portia makes this about mercy, but shows no mercy to the Jew. And the Jew, of course, wanted to show no mercy to Antonio. So, Katti, equal balance is all right, but justice is done. But justice should be tempered, as Portia says in that famous speech, with mercy. But no mercy is shown to the Jew. And the last line before Shylock exits the court, he says, "I will sign everything that you want, send it home to me, and I will give all my money away and write my will and become a Christian." And the court says, "Are you content? Are you satisfied that your life is saved?" And Shylock, the exit line is one of the most significant and one of the most upsetting lines that Shakespeare wrote. The Jew says, I am content. He said, just before that, he had said, take everything, take my life, I do not want to live. And to that last jab of the court, are you content? He says, I am content. If you want me to say I'm satisfied, I'm satisfied. So what Shakespeare does is he shows you the villainy of Shylock. He also shows you the hypocrisy of the court of Venice. He also shows you the working of justice, but he humanizes the character of Shylock. Shylock is a hated Jew and remains hated during the course of the play, but Shakespeare also shows him to be a human being. And in a very famous speech by Shylock, Shylock says, hath not a Jew eyes? Do we not bleed when we are pricked? Do we not have the same disease as the Christians? Do we not have the same cures as the Christians? We are human beings as you are. And this great speech of Shakespeare humanizes Shylock in our eyes. And Shylock may remain a monster in many ways, but he also becomes a human monster who has his humanity, which is twisted and warped due to hate, due to society, due to repression, due to oppression, and due to his greed. So I think we shall have to stop here today. And if you have any questions, I'm told that you will have to type them out and throw them at me, and I'll try to answer them if I can. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I'm waiting for the questions to come up. Like the students are on in the YouTube live. So please bear with us. Okay. Till then, I have few questions, sir. May I please ask you?
You may. I'll try to answer them if I can.
Okay, no, sir, you can, of course. Sir, you told about the revenge tragedies. So there are many revenge tragedies in other European languages as well. So was Shakespeare inspired by those revenge tragedies? And
He was in many ways, because you see, Shakespeare lived at a time which you very well know is called the Renaissance. And
yes,
the Renaissance was a revival of things classical, Greek and Latin. And it's the Greeks who started the trend of revenge tragedies. I said that if you see Cholet, you'll be able to understand what happens in a revenge tragedy. It was started by the Greeks in European culture. And these revenge tragedies by Sophocles, by Aeschylus, by Euripides were translated during the Renaissance by Seneca, translated them into Latin, and the English writer also translated Seneca into English. Jasper Heywood translated Seneca into English, which Shakespeare and his contemporaries read and saw some of the performances and were naturally inspired by what they saw, filtered through Seneca, Latin, and then into English from the Greek tragedies. So that's part of the heritage of the Renaissance, which Shakespeare and his contemporaries got.
okay, sir. So we have a question from Trishan Das. He is in class 10. He is asking that, sir, can we call Shakespeare as a social reformer?
You can very well call Shakespeare a social reformer, but it's a very important question. But you see, his main job was not social reform, but to provide entertainment through some wonderful plays. Now, during the course of writing these plays, he did focus on many of the ills of his society, as I have pointed out in this short talk about Merchant of Venice. Many of the ills of society were focused upon by Shakespeare. And those ills were presented in a popular fashion with some approaches at resolving them, at solving these ills. So, social reform was not his primary objective, but being such a great writer and having so much insight into the workings of society, he did give us a lot of social corruption, social problems which needed to be resolved. Now, this is something that social reformers do. His job, I repeat, was not reform, but provide entertainment, which he did. And through that entertainment, he focused on these social ills.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Oishi Mitra, she's asking that sometimes it may happen that we get confused between two parts in a scene or between two scenes. In that case, what shall we do?
I did not understand the question. Can you make it more specific? How confused between two parts?
Sir, she's asking that it often happens that since the scenes are lengthy at times, so the students do get confused in between the scenes or in between the parts in the scenes. Okay, in that case, how can it be easier for them? How can they
Oh,
study it in an easy manner? That is what she's asking.
you see, you will have to break down the scene into its various components. If it's 500 lines long, which is very long, then if you see that there are various movements in the scene, something, there is some tempo, something, the interest goes high, then it becomes less interesting. There is suspense, there is less suspense, there is incident, then there is less incident. So you'll have to break down the scene into its short segments, small sections, and then concentrate on each section to see how they all add up to the total impression of the scene. You see, it's like an alphabet. A, B, C, D, there are 26 letters in the alphabet, A to Z. So if you concentrate on A, B, C, then D, E, F, then three more, and add them up, finally you can see the whole range of the alphabet. That is one way of doing it, but I do agree with you that long scenes can be very boring and can be very confusing.
Thank you, sir. Sir, in Shakespeare, even the villains had moving stories, right? So I want your comment. The students want to know your comment on that, sir. Like the villains had moving stories in Shakespeare.
Well, in popular audience response, Shylock is a villain, and who wants to cut off the flesh of a Christian merchant. So, but as we have just seen, he is humanized by Shakespeare. He's a villain who is also like a human being, like you and me, but made villainous by his own greed and by other reasons. So Shakespeare's villains, apart from one or two like Iago in Othello, who are evil incarnate, Iago is asked why he wants to do this to Othello, why he wants to destroy Othello. So he says, because I like doing this. Coleridge, a poet and a critic, says, the motiveless motive hunting of Iago. Iago has no motive except that he's evil and he loves doing evil. There is No one has done him any harm or enough harm to do what he does. But he destroys human beings because he's like the devil. So there are one or two characters who are devilish. Otherwise, Shakespeare's villains all have some bits of humanity in them and all draw our sympathies from time to time because they have certain qualities which move us to sympathy towards them.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Ayush Panda. He's asking you rather, why Shakespeare is called a romantic? Why is Shakespeare called the romantic poet? What are the reasons behind it?
That's a very important question. Uh, he's called a romantic poet because of many reasons. Uh, the Elizabethan period, if you read your history of literature, which is a very boring thing to read, but if you read your history of literature, you'll find that the Elizabethan period, Shakespeare's period, is called the first romantic age. Now, he belongs to that period when the imagination, which is central to romanticism, is given wings. When the writers, though they have inherited a lot of classical writing and thoughts and traditions, are creative through their imagination and they are free of these rules, or they tend to be free of these rules. So to be romantic is to be free of the rules governing traditional writing. So Shakespeare's writing is free. For instance, you have someone has just asked long scenes. I mean, Shakespeare does not write symmetrical scenes. One scene can be very short, another can be very long. So he does not follow the rules of writing. As we have also mentioned before, he does not write tragedy, pure tragedy, or pure comedy. He mixes tragic and comic. So these are things which are anti-classical, and therefore he symbolizes romantic freedom, freedom of the imagination. You see, I mentioned Romeo and Juliet as a romantic tragedy. It not only means that it's about love, romantic, but it means that the children want to be free of the restrictive rules governing marriage, governing union between their parents and their communities. So, to be romantic is to fight against rules, to want to be free, to do what you want to do. And Shakespeare's plays show you characters who want to do this, and also the structure of the plays are such that they do not follow rules all the time. They make their own rules. They make their own ways of writing. So that's why he's called a romantic poet. Poet because his plays are mostly written in verse, but he also has a lot of prose. So because we read him as a poet, when we see his performance, we also hear his poetry, but we see other things too.
Thank you, sir. So the last question I would like to ask you, there is a lot of debate over the fact that Caliban did not deserve so much rude behavior from from Prospero in the play The Tempest. Sir, what do you have to say about it?
Uh, your students are doing Tempest, or have they done Tempest?
Sir, no. They have not done, but they're doing in classes 11 and 12.
Okay. Well, Caliban is Prospero's slave. Okay. And Caliban owns that island. That is, the island which Prospero rules over belonged to Caliban's mother. The mother is called Sycorax, and it was taken away by Prospero. And Caliban, who really is a native of that island, and that place belongs to him. India belongs to Indians. So Caliban's island is taken over by the colonizer Prosper. You see? So one way of reading this play is the conflict between the colonizer and the colonized. Prospero is the colonizer who comes and takes over somebody else's land, somebody else's life, makes all the rules, oppresses him. And therefore, Caliban is oppressed and colonized by Prospero, and the relationship is between a master and a slave. So Caliban, as a slave, is a very intelligent slave, and he wants to create trouble for Prospero all the time. But outwardly, he seems to be worshipful of Caliban. So this is a way of looking at the play as a master-slave relationship, as the relationship between a colonizer who comes from outside, takes over the land of the natives, and then mistreats the natives so harshly, which is part of the history of colonization all over the world. The British came and took over India and treated us harshly, took away all our wealth and resources, and left us nothing. Okay, they did leave us something, but I mean, that's one way of looking at this play, and I think that is the way that you have been suggesting about the relationship between these two.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. You have answered to all the questions. Thanks a lot, sir. I would like to now request Mr. Tanmoy Bhattacharya, coordinator for the Middle and Senior School, St. Augustine's Day School, Barrackpur, to deliver the vote of thanks. Sir, over to you, please.
That was a very, very interesting session from you, sir. Your effortless movement from a classical topic like this into films, Hindi films, which is so very popular among all of us, and even Gopal Bhar, moving on to the contribution of Jews in the development of our city, very own city. So that was very, very interesting. And I, on behalf of St. Augustine's Day School, Barrackpur, we are very, very thankful to you that you could spare some time for our children and address them on this topic. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Well, I do hope the children liked what I said.
Absolutely, sir. I feel that this will kindle a new interest into the topic. So they will see it with renewed interest. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, the main thing is to give them some enjoyment.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Over to you, Meghali ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your time. Thanks a lot, sir. Bye-bye. I request all of you to kindly log off. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tanmay, sir, may I leave?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.